Captain Elena Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Prometheus, humanity's first deep space vessel to venture beyond Sol's protective embrace. The view screen showed the last glimpse of Neptune fading into the distance as they approached the system's edge. "FTL drives charging, Captain," Lieutenant Rice announced, his fingers dancing across the holographic interface. "Ready on your mark." Elena took a deep breath, feeling the weight of humanity's hopes on her shoulders. "Engage." The stars stretched and blurred as the Prometheus leaped forward, its revolutionary engine design, cobbled together from theoretical physics and desperate innovation, tearing a hole through space itself. The ship shuddered, stabilized, and then cruised smoothly through the dimensional tunnel they had created. "Transit successful," Rice confirmed, unable to keep the excitement from his voice. "We've done it, Captain." The celebration was short-lived. As they emerged back into normal space at their destination, alarms blared across multiple stations. "Unknown vessel approaching," Security Chief Okafor reported. "Configuration unlike anything in our database." The vessel was sleek perfection, mathematically precise curves and angles forming a shape that seemed to exist in defiance of practical engineering. It approached with impossible grace, matching their velocity exactly. "We're being scanned," Okafor said. "Extensively." Before Elena could respond, a beam of light materialized in the center of the bridge, coalescing into a tall, insectoid figure. Its four eyes blinked asynchronously, while mandibles clicked in what seemed like agitation. "I am Inspector Zilfar of the Concordat Enforcement Division," the being announced, its translator rendering the clicks and chirps into flat English. "Your vessel has triggered 17 major and 43 minor regulatory infractions upon entry into Concordat space." Elena stepped forward. "We were unaware of any regulations. We're on a peaceful mission of exploration from Earth." "Ignorance of galactic law is no excuse," Zilfar responded, producing a thin device that projected a holographic list that scrolled on and on. "Improper shielding configuration. Excessive engine thrust ratios. Non-compliant life support redundancies. Forbidden dimensional manipulation techniques. Unauthorized gravitational field modifications." The list continued as the bridge crew exchanged confused glances. "Your FTL mechanism alone breaks 9 separate conventions established to prevent cosmic instability," Zilfar continued. "This vessel must be impounded immediately pending modifications to meet Concordat standards." Elena's expression remained neutral despite the surge of protective instinct she felt. The Prometheus represented years of humanity's best efforts, their solution to the resource limitations and unique challenges Earth had faced. "Before we proceed," she said carefully, "I'd like to review these regulations in full. As representatives of Earth, we want to ensure complete understanding and compliance." Zilfar hesitated, mandibles clicking rapidly. The Galactic Concordat regulatory framework comprises approximately 12,000 standard pages of technical specifications and legal parameters. "Perfect," Elena said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Please transfer the complete document to our system immediately." As Zilfar reluctantly interfaced with their computer, Elena caught Chief Engineer Patel's eye across the bridge and gave an almost imperceptible nod. Patel understood immediately. They had no intention of neutering their ship to comply with alien regulations. They needed to study every rule, every specification, and every parameter, not to follow them, but to find the loopholes that would allow humanity to navigate this new regulated universe on their own terms. The game had begun. 6 months after the Prometheus incident, Inspector Zilfar's career hung by a thread. His superiors had been displeased with his handling of humanity's first contact, believing he had been too lenient in merely issuing citations rather than immediate impoundment. Now, as his scanner detected multiple ships emerging from Earth's solar system, he feared the worst. "Bring us alongside the lead vessel," he ordered his pilot, mandibles clicking nervously. What appeared on the view screen left him speechless. The human ships bore almost no resemblance to the Prometheus or even to each other. One featured a massive rotating midsection, another seemed cobbled together from modular compartments, and a third appeared to be three separate hulls connected by energy tethers. "What are those spinning sections?" his assistant Mrivak asked, compound eyes widening. "Centrifugal force generators," Xylthar realized. "They're creating artificial gravity through rotation, rather than using standard gravitational field projectors." "Is that allowed?" "The regulations specifically prohibit artificial gravity generators. These aren't generators. They are exploiting a physical principle." As they approached the lead vessel, their scanners went wild. The ship's central hull pulsed with energy readings that spiked and fell, rather than maintaining the steady output required by Concordat regulations. "Request immediate communication," Xylthar ordered. The screen flickered to show a human with silver at his temples and a diplomatic insignia on his uniform. "Inspector Zilfar, what a pleasure." Ambassador Marcus Way smiled. "We were hoping you'd be our welcoming committee. These vessels must be impounded immediately," Xylthar began, trying to project authority. "They violate numerous." "Do they?" Way interrupted, raising an eyebrow. "We've taken the liberty of preparing comprehensive documentation on how each ship fully complies with Concordat regulations." He gestured, and data began streaming to Zilfar's ship. As Xylthar scrolled through the files, his mandibles clicked in growing agitation. The humans had done the impossible. They'd actually read all 12,000 pages of regulations and found every possible loophole. "You can't classify those as mining equipment," he protested, pointing at what were clearly weapon mounts. "According to Section 437.29b, equipment designed to fragment non-biological matter for resource extraction doesn't qualify as weaponry." Way quoted from memory. "Our documentation includes test results confirming their primary function is asteroid mining. These engine configurations, fully compliant with thrust limitations," Way smiled. "They simply operate in controlled bursts rather than continuous output. The regulations specify maximum sustained thrust, not peak performance." Xylthar was saved from further embarrassment by an urgent communication from his ship. "Sir," his security officer reported, "we've detected unauthorized access attempts to our engineering database." Xylthar whirled to face the ambassador. "Your people are attempting to hack our systems." Way looked genuinely surprised. "I assure you, we would never." "Sir," his officer interrupted, "the access attempts are coming from our own engineering staff. 3 junior officers are attempting to download human ship schematics." As Xylthar processed this betrayal, he noticed a small transport ship approaching from a nearby Concordat outpost. It wasn't scheduled, and his stomach sank as he realized what was happening. "Engineers from other species," he said quietly. "They're coming to see your ships." Way smiled. "We can't help if your regulations stifled innovation so thoroughly that your own people are desperate for fresh ideas." Xylthar realized the humans hadn't just broken the rules. They were breaking the Concordat itself, not through force, but through imagination. The peaceful Concordat outpost Harmony 7 shimmered against the backdrop of a crimson nebula, its graceful spires and perfect symmetry embodying the order the Concordat had maintained for millennia. That order shattered in an instant as the first barrage from the Vascanar pirate fleet struck the station's outer ring. "Emergency distress signal transmitted," the station administrator reported, her tentacles trembling. "Concordat Defense Fleet estimates arrival in 23 minutes. On the approaching Concordat vessels, Admiral Kexval calmly observed the attack through long-range sensors. "Maintain formation Delta 7, he instructed. "Prepare standard warning broadcasts in accordance with Section 18.3 of the Engagement Protocol." "Sir," his second-in-command ventured, "the station is taking heavy damage. Perhaps we could accelerate our approach." "The protocol requires 3 formal warnings at 5-minute intervals before engagement," Kexval replied sternly. "Deviation would compromise our regulatory standing." As the fleet maintained its methodical approach, Sensors detected unexpected movement from a nearby asteroid field. "Sir, unidentified vessels approaching at high velocity," the sensor officer reported. "Configuration matches. Human ships, sir." 3 human vessels streaked toward the battle, ignoring the Concordat fleet's orders to stand down and maintain distance. The UES Defiant, commanded by Captain Sarah Jackson, cut all power as it approached the pirate flagship, appearing dead in space. "Reroute all power to weapons," Jackson ordered. "The moment we drift past their sensor blind spot, bring everything back online." Aboard the UES Creativity, Commander Okonkwo separated his vessel into 3 distinct sections connected by magnetic tethers, each component now functioning as an independent ship. "Surround and confuse," he ordered. "Execute Crazy Ivan maneuvers on my mark." The third ship, UES Audacity, performed a slingshot around Harmony 7 itself, using the station's gravity to accelerate to speeds the Concordat deemed recklessly unsafe for close-quarters navigation. The pirate fleet, prepared for the predictable, regulated response of Concordat ships, found themselves suddenly overwhelmed by tactics they couldn't anticipate. The Defiant resurrected behind their flagship, weapons blazing at point-blank range. The Creativity's 3 sections darted between pirate vessels, forcing them to constantly readjust targeting. The Audacity skimmed so close to pirate hulls that their automated systems triggered emergency maneuvers to avoid collision. "What are they doing?" Kexval watched in horror and fascination. "Those maneuvers violate at least 30 safety regulations." By the time the Concordat fleet completed their systems checks and approached within engagement range, the battle was over. The pirate fleet was in retreat, with 3 vessels disabled and the rest scattered. On Harmony 7, human medics had already begun treating the wounded, using unconventional but effective field techniques that made the station's medical staff both uncomfortable and impressed. Admiral Kexval personally transported to the station, where he found Captain Jackson coordinating relief efforts. "Captain," he began formally, "I must issue citations for unauthorized combat intervention and reckless engagement tactics." Before Jackson could respond, a small alien child approached, offering a hand-drawn picture depicting the human ships defending the station. "You saved my family," the child said simply. Kexval stared at the drawing, then at the grateful faces around him. His regulatory datapad suddenly felt very heavy in his grasp. "The citations can wait," he said finally. "Perhaps we should discuss collaboration." The Grand Concordat chamber gleamed with polished precision, its acoustics engineered to amplify authority and diminish dissent. 5,000 delegates from across the galaxy had gathered for what the High Council termed an educational summit, but what everyone knew was an attempt to bring humans into compliance. Chief Engineer Sofia Rodriguez walked confidently to the center of the chamber, her worn boots and practical jumpsuit standing in stark contrast to the ornate ceremonial attire of the Concordat engineers. Behind her, a team of Earth's top engineering minds carried not data crystals or presentation materials, but actual physical tools and components. High Engineer Peltorax rose from his elevated seat. "We have convened this summit to instruct humanity on proper starship design principles that have maintained galactic stability for 2 millennia. Sophia nodded respectfully, then casually tapped her wrist device. The chamber's presentation system flickered as she effortlessly bypassed its security protocols. "Before we begin your instruction," she said, "I'd like to share where we come from." A hologram materialized, not of a spaceship, but of an ancient submarine. "Before we reached the stars, we had to master our own oceans." "This is not the approved presentation format," Peltorax protested. Sophia continued undeterred. "Earth has never had the luxury of abundant resources or peace. Every technological advancement came from necessity and constraint." The hologram shifted to show Earth's troubled history, resource wars, climate disasters, and near extinctions. "Our ships incorporate redundant systems inspired by Earth's creatures," she explained, showing biological models alongside engineering schematics. backup nervous systems from earthworms, distributed circulation from octopi, regenerative capabilities from starfish. The alien engineers leaned forward despite themselves. Fascination overcoming indoctrination. "We don't build ships to follow rules," Sophia declared. "We build them to survive anything the universe throws at us." On Earth, engineers who only followed established protocols didn't last long. During the mandated refreshment interval, young alien engineers crowded around the human team. A Xilarian engineer nervously showed Sophia a hidden data crystal. "I designed this propulsion system that uses 90% less fuel," she whispered, but it was rejected for deviating from standard configurations. Similar confessions emerged from engineers of a dozen species. Innovation shelved, ideas suppressed, all sacrificed on the altar of standardization. Sophia watched as her team began impromptu collaboration sessions, sharing Earth's infamous stimulant coffee along with engineering principles. By evening, something remarkable had taken shape in the center of the chamber, a hybrid engine incorporating elements from 6 different species designs, sitting atop an improvised test stand constructed from parts the humans had smuggled in as cultural artifacts. When Peltorax returned to formally continue the summit, he found the chamber transformed into a bustling workshop. The prototype engine hummed with a harmony that shouldn't have been possible according to Concordat physics. "This is highly irregular," he sputtered. A young Concordat engineer beside him couldn't contain her excitement. "High engineer, the efficiency readings are beyond anything in our records. This collaboration has produced something revolutionary." Peltorax stared at the humans moving among his people, spreading ideas like a contagion. He realized with sudden clarity that the Concordat had made a grave miscalculation. They had intended to contain humanity through regulations. Instead, they had invited the spark directly into their carefully constructed powder keg. The Grand Concordat chamber gleamed with polished precision, its acoustics engineered to amplify authority and diminish dissent. 5,000 delegates from across the galaxy had gathered for what the High Council termed an educational summit, but what everyone knew was an attempt to bring humans into compliance. Chief Engineer Sofia Rodriguez walked confidently to the center of the chamber, her worn boots and practical jumpsuit standing in stark contrast to the ornate ceremonial attire of the Concordat engineers. Behind her, a team of Earth's top engineering minds carried not data crystals or presentation materials, but actual physical tools and components. High Engineer Peltorax rose from his elevated seat. "We have convened this summit to instruct humanity on proper starship design principles that have maintained galactic stability for 2 millennia. Sophia nodded respectfully, then casually tapped her wrist device. The chamber's presentation system flickered as she effortlessly bypassed its security protocols. "Before we begin your instruction," she said, "I'd like to share where we come from." A hologram materialized, not of a spaceship, but of an ancient submarine. "Before we reached the stars, we had to master our own oceans." "This is not the approved presentation format," Peltorax protested. Sophia continued undeterred. "Earth has never had the luxury of abundant resources or peace. Every technological advancement came from necessity and constraint." The hologram shifted to show Earth's troubled history, resource wars, climate disasters, and near extinctions. "Our ships incorporate redundant systems inspired by Earth's creatures," she explained, showing biological models alongside engineering schematics. "Backup nervous systems from earthworms, distributed circulation from octopi, regenerative capabilities from starfish." The alien engineers leaned forward despite themselves, fascination overcoming indoctrination. "We don't build ships to follow rules," Sophia declared. "We build them to survive anything the universe throws at us." On Earth, engineers who only followed established protocols didn't last long. During the mandated refreshment interval, young alien engineers crowded around the human team. A Xilarian engineer nervously showed Sophia a hidden data crystal. "I designed this propulsion system that uses 90% less fuel," she whispered, but it was rejected for deviating from standard configurations. Similar confessions emerged from engineers of a dozen species. Innovation shelved, ideas suppressed, all sacrificed on the altar of standardization. Sophia watched as her team began impromptu collaboration sessions, sharing Earth's infamous stimulant coffee along with engineering principles. By evening, something remarkable had taken shape in the center of the chamber, a hybrid engine incorporating elements from 6 different species designs, sitting atop an improvised test stand constructed from parts the humans had smuggled in as cultural artifacts. When Peltorax returned to formally continue the summit, he found the chamber transformed into a bustling workshop. The prototype engine hummed with a harmony that shouldn't have been possible according to Concordat physics. "This is highly irregular," he sputtered. A young Concordat engineer beside him couldn't contain her excitement. "High engineer, the efficiency readings are beyond anything in our records. This collaboration has produced something revolutionary." Peltorax stared at the humans moving among his people, spreading ideas like a contagion. He realized with sudden clarity that the Concordat had made a grave miscalculation. They had intended to contain humanity through regulations. Instead, they had invited the spark directly into their carefully constructed powder keg. The Concordat blockade formed a perfect sphere around human space. 500 identical vessels arranged in mathematically precise formation, each maintaining exactly the same distance from its neighbors, as mandated by Regulation 47.9 bits on containment procedures. On the bridge of the Concordat flagship Unwavering Principle, Grand Admiral Vorseth observed the holographic display with satisfaction. "The quarantine is complete. No ships may enter or leave human territory without inspection and certification of regulatory compliance." His second-in-command nodded. "They have been officially notified of the containment parameters and the justification. Quarantine of potentially destabilizing technical influence." And their response? A single message from Admiral Petrov of their defense fleet. "We acknowledge your blockade and respect your position." Vorseth's brow ridges rose in surprise. No protest. No negotiation attempt. "Nothing, sir. Complete communication silence since that message 3 days ago." That silence continued through the 4th day, creating increasing unease among the blockade commanders. The humans had offered no resistance, sent no diplomatic envoys, attempted no runners through the blockade. They simply waited. On the 5th day, everything changed. A junior communications officer on the Unwavering Principle suddenly removed his headset in confusion. "Sir, I'm receiving engineering discussions on all frequencies." Across the blockade, similar reports flooded in. Every communication device in Concordat space, from military channels to civilian entertainment systems, began receiving unencrypted transmissions from human space. Design schematics, technical innovations, engineering debates, theoretical physics discussions, all flowing freely through the electromagnetic spectrum. "Block those transmissions," Vorseth ordered. "We can't, sir," his communications chief replied. "They're broadcasting on all frequencies simultaneously, using a signal modulation technique we've never seen. We would need to shut down our entire communications network to stop them." The humans hadn't attacked the blockade. They had simply rendered it irrelevant. In a distant mining colony in Concordat space, a Kelbraxian maintenance worker named Trell received the transmissions on his personal device. He studied a human-designed safety feature and implemented it during his shift. When a pressure failure occurred hours later, 30 lives were saved by the modification. On a luxury cruise vessel, junior engineer Lixel adapted a human cooling system innovation that prevented a catastrophic drive failure. The passengers never knew how close they had come to disaster. A week into the blockade, Vorseth received an urgent message from Concordat High Command. "Sir, unmodified vessels are becoming increasingly rare throughout Concordat space. Ships are arriving at dockyards requesting unauthorized modifications. 3 engineering academies have completely revised their curricula." Vorseth stared at the perfect, useless blockade on his display. "The humans found the one thing we couldn't regulate," he said quietly. "Ideas." On Earth, Admiral Petrov sat in a quiet office overlooking the Pacific Ocean. A young lieutenant entered with a data tablet. "Sir, our transmissions have reached 87% of Concordat territory. We're receiving implementation reports from 23 species across 412 worlds." Petrov nodded, watching the waves crash against the shore. An eternal reminder of the futility of trying to hold back a force of nature. "Humanity spent its history learning to adapt or die," he said. "Now the galaxy will learn the same lesson." The blockade remained physically intact, a perfect ring of ships surrounding human space. But as a barrier, it had already failed completely. Alarms blared across the Viridian sector as the ancient wormhole that served as its only connection to the wider galaxy began to collapse. Energy readings fluctuated wildly as the spatial anomaly that had remained stable for millennia suddenly destabilized. "Evacuation protocols initiated," announced Sector Commander Laz Krill, his normally steady voice tight with stress. "All vessels proceed according to Emergency Regulation 89.2, maintaining proper distancing and velocity restrictions." The Concordat evacuation fleet moved with precision, ships forming the prescribed patterns as they approached population centers. The methodical process had been drilled countless times over centuries. It was also horrifically inadequate. Current projections indicate 38.7% evacuation success rate before complete wormhole collapse, reported the chief analyst. The remaining population will be isolated from the Concordat with no means of rescue. Commander Laz Krill accepted this with stoic resignation. The protocols must be followed. Deviation would risk further destabilization. "Sir," his sensor officer interrupted, "multiple vessels approaching from outside the sector. Configuration is human." Laz Krill's eyes narrowed. "They have no jurisdiction here. Order them to withdraw immediately." But the human fleet, led by the now Admiral Elena Chen aboard the redesigned UES Prometheus, continued its approach. The Concordat officials stared in disbelief at the sensor readings. The human vessels now sported configurations never before recorded, shields modified to withstand increasing gravitational stress, engines reconfigured to operate in destabilizing environments. "This is Admiral Chen to Viridian Command," came the transmission. "We didn't come to evacuate. We came to stabilize the wormhole." "Impossible," Laz Krill responded immediately. "Our scientists have confirmed the collapse is irreversible." "Your scientists operate within the constraints of Concordat physics," Chen replied. "We don't." The human ships positioned themselves at mathematically precise points around the collapsing wormhole, a formation that made no sense by Concordat standards. Engineers across the sector watched in professional fascination as the human vessels generated some kind of counter-resonance field. "What they're attempting is theoretically impossible," muttered the Concordat chief scientist. "The gravimetric equations clearly show." Her words died as the wormhole's fluctuations began to slow. Aboard the Prometheus, Lieutenant Maya Patil monitored the field harmonics with intense concentration. "Admiral, I'm noticing a pattern in the wormhole's fluctuations. It matches the Rodriguez harmonic convergence theorem." "Are you certain?" Chen asked. "Yes, Ma'am. If we adjust our field generators to match this frequency." Her fingers flew across the controls, implementing the calculation. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The wormhole's erratic energy spikes smoothed out, the spatial tiers began to heal, and the alarming readings stabilized. The young lieutenant had not just delayed the collapse, she had reversed it entirely. "Impossible," whispered the Concordat scientist, watching her lifelong understanding of wormhole physics crumble before her eyes. As the evacuation fleet continued its now unnecessary mission, Chen received a private communication from Commander Laz Krill. "How did you know this would work?" he asked. "We didn't," Chen admitted. "But Earth had to overcome its resource limitations through theoretical physics. When standard solutions fail, we explore the impossible." Laz Krill was silent for a long moment. "The Concordat has maintained peace through unchanging stability for millennia," he said finally. "But perhaps stagnation and stability are not the same thing." The wormhole pulsed with renewed energy, more stable than it had been in centuries. The moonlight cast long shadows across the ancient stone courtyard as Aria pressed her palm against the weathered wall. Her fingers traced the intricate engravings, feeling the subtle vibrations of forgotten magic that still hummed within the stones. Every breath seemed to stir memories long buried, whispers of a past that refused to be silenced. Marcus stood a few paces behind her, his hand instinctively resting near the hilt of his blade. The night air felt thick with anticipation, charged with an energy that made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. He watched Aria carefully, knowing her connection to this place ran deeper than mere curiosity. "We shouldn't linger," he murmured, though his words carried more caution than threat. The courtyard had been abandoned for centuries, yet something about the location felt unnervingly alive. Ancient stones seemed to breathe, to remember, to watch. Aria's fingers stopped at a particular section of the wall, her touch lingering on a series of symbols that looked more like intricate knots than traditional writing. "These markings," she said softly, "they're not just decorative. They're a language older than any written record." Marcus stepped closer, studying the engravings. Unlike the countless ancient scripts he had encountered during his years of travel, these symbols seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles. A trick of moonlight, perhaps, or something far more mysterious. "Can you read them?" he asked, knowing full well that Aria's talents extended beyond conventional understanding. She closed her eyes, her palms still pressed against the stone. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a subtle vibration began to pulse beneath her hand. The symbols seemed to glow with a faint, silvery light, so subtle that Marcus wondered if he was imagining it. "It's a warning," Aria whispered, her voice distant. "And a promise. Something was sealed here long ago, something that was never meant to be remembered." A cold wind swept through the courtyard, carrying with it the faintest whisper of a sound, something between a laugh and a cry. Marcus's hand now gripped his blade fully, his muscles tensed and ready. Years of training had taught him to trust these moments of inexplicable tension. Aria's eyes snapped open, their usual deep green now flecked with an unusual silver luminescence. "We're not alone," she said, her voice remarkably calm despite the growing sense of unease. From the shadows at the far end of the courtyard, a figure began to take shape. Not quite solid, not quite transparent, something in between that defied the natural laws of existence. Marcus had seen many strange things in his travels, but this was different. The figure watched them, waited, and in that moment of absolute stillness, Aria and Marcus realized their journey had just taken a turn they could never have anticipated.